between ambition and accountability. Reading the Airtel-IBM partnership. On October 15, 2025, IBM and Bharti Airtel announced a new partnership. Per the announcement, the partnership focuses on strengthening Airtel Cloud by pairing Airtel's nationwide data center and fiber network with IBM's hybrid cloud software, Power 11 systems, and AI platform. It wasn't a loud announcement, but it carried weight. India's cloud market has reached a point where every decision now sits between two pressures: tightening data sovereignty rules and the convenience of hyperscalers. This partnership tries to bridge that divide. For Airtel, the motive is clear. It already runs one of the largest networks in the country, but has struggled to be taken seriously as a full-stack technology player. As it goes up the value chain and targets large enterprises, highly regulated industries, and public sector organizations, IBM becomes a strategic catalyst. The partnership enables Airtel to pair its scale and agility with IBM's institutional trust, a quality that continues to carry weight across banking, insurance, and government circles, where reliability and compliance remain non-negotiable. For IBM, the alignment is pragmatic. The company has had a long and steady presence in India, but has struggled to adjust as the market moved toward local control and AI-driven models. Partnering with Airtel gives IBM reach into one of the country's biggest network and data center ecosystems, backed by regulatory depth and national coverage. That makes it easier for IBM to serve large, regulated clients without building that footprint on its own. The partnership reflects a grounded reading of India's growth story, where proximity and trust matter as much as technology. The timing matters. India's new Digital Personal Data Protection Act and the Reserve Bank's localization mandates have made data residency non-negotiable for many sectors. Enterprises want cloud economics without regulatory risk. Airtel and IBM are offering exactly that. AI and modern workloads hosted within India's borders, under Indian law, and on infrastructure built by an Indian company. It's a direct response to the unease CIOs feel about global clouds that still move metadata offshore. But alignment on paper is not alignment in practice. Airtel runs on speed and margin. IBM runs on process and premium service. Those cultures rarely move in sync. History gives a warning. Their earlier outsourcing partnership lost steam once cost and control collided. IBM's alliances with AT&T and Vodafone followed a similar arc. Strong launch, slow fade. Execution, not technology, decides how long the enthusiasm lasts. If it works, Airtel and IBM could finally give Indian enterprises a local cloud that feels trustworthy and technically competitive, a middle path between national policy and global performance. If it drifts, it will become another case study in mismatched priorities. Greyhound standpoint. At Greyhound Research, we see this partnership as a measured but high-risk experiment. It captures the country's mood around data control and its hunger for credible local alternatives. The idea makes sense. The challenge will be endurance, whether Airtel can build enterprise depth fast enough, and whether IBM can stay invested long enough to prove that sovereignty and scale can, at last, live together. What each partner is really bringing: strategy beneath the surface. When IBM and Airtel went public with their partnership on October 15, 2025, the press statement sounded tidy. Airtel gets access to IBM's AI and hybrid cloud technology, and IBM gets to anchor its tech in a sovereign Indian platform. However, beneath that balance sheet lies a deeper story about what each is actually buying into and what each is risking. Airtel's bet: borrow depth for borrowed time. Airtel's motivation is not complicated. It wants to stop being seen as just a carrier with data centers and start being taken seriously as a full-fledged technology platform. It already has the assets: 14 data centers, edge locations across metros, and a national fiber backbone. What it doesn't have yet is the perception of enterprise-grade depth. IBM's presence instantly fills that credibility gap and gives Airtel a way to speak the same language as enterprise CIOs and regulators. IBM gives Airtel access to hybrid workloads it could not previously handle. Power 11 systems can host critical applications like SAP, Oracle, and core banking, while IBM's Red Hat and Watsonx stack open a path into AI orchestration. This is especially valuable for Airtel's public sector and BFSI targets, the organizations that want cloud without feeling they have stepped outside Indian jurisdiction. Airtel's own internal migration of 90% of its workloads on an Airtel cloud gave it a story to tell, and IBM now gives it the technology scaffolding to make that story believable to others. Even so, the dependence runs deeper than it appears. Airtel is effectively renting IBM's enterprise halo while it builds its own credibility. That buys time, but not immunity. The danger is obvious. If Airtel does not invest fast enough in its own engineering talent, it risks becoming a perpetual reseller of IBM infrastructure rather than an independent platform operator. In India's cloud market, where cost and flexibility matter more than brand loyalty, that dependence could prove costly later. IBM's play, a way back into the market it built and lost. IBM's logic is a mirror image of Airtel's. It needs a foothold in a market it helped create, but no longer leads. A decade ago, IBM owned India's enterprise IT conversation. Then came AWS and Azure, bringing elasticity and pricing Airtel could never match. IBM's local contracts shrank, most visibly with Airtel itself, which had the size of its outsourcing deal in 2014 and diversified its vendors. The Airtel partnership gives IBM a second act, one that does not require owning the infrastructure or taking the compliance risk. IBM gets its hardware, middleware, and AI software deployed across Airtel's sovereign data centers while attaching its brand to a national story regulators and CIOs find reassuring. Local control, global-grade technology, and auditable compliance. Every enterprise that adopts Airtel Cloud with IBM inside becomes a potential customer for higher-margin layers. Watsonx, OpenShift, Turbonomic, observability tools, and even consulting. There's also a subtler gain that IBM cannot afford to overlook. This is its chance to showcase Power 11 in a regulated market where performance and reliability matter more than price. If Power 11's AI, inferencing, and hybrid capabilities succeed in India, the country becomes a reference point for similar models in Southeast Asia and the Middle East, regions IBM already views as strategic growth frontiers. Still, IBM carries its own risk. It is now tied to Airtel's ability to execute. Airtel controls the customer relationships, pricing, and daily operations. If Airtel starts prioritizing hyperscaler alliances, as it has with Google Cloud and AWS, IBM could find itself reduced to a niche supplier in a multi-vendor story. For IBM, the prize is scale, but the risk is invisibility, shared opportunity, and shared exposure. Both companies are betting on the same shift in the market, that Indian enterprises are finally willing to pay for compliance-grade infrastructure, even if it costs a bit more. That assumption is risky. CIOs want sovereignty, but they still track every rupee of cloud spend. The hyperscalers continue to offer generous credits, deep partner ecosystems, and global SLAs. Airtel and IBM must prove their total cost advantage through real deployments, not presentations. Execution will be the real test. Airtel's sales force must learn to sell complex enterprise workloads, not just capacity and connectivity. IBM, for its part, has to train and trust those teams instead of parachuting its own consultants into every deal. Both sides will need patience. The first few quarters will bring slow, deliberate wins, mostly migrations from legacy systems, and only after that will the partners know whether this model can truly scale. If they hold steady, the architecture could work, a sovereign, hybrid cloud stack that satisfies regulators and appeals to CFOs tired of unpredictable hyperscaler billing. If they falter, the cracks will show quickly, exposing both the limits of IBM's channel discipline and Airtel's enterprise maturity. Greyhound standpoint. At Greyhound Research, we read this partnership as a two-way dependency wrapped in strategic optimism. Airtel borrows IBM's credibility to climb the enterprise stack, and IBM borrows Airtel's local trust to stay in the game. Both gain what they lack, and both inherit the other's constraints. The opportunity is significant because India's sovereign cloud market is finally opening wide. Yet the risk is equally real. The rhythm of execution, not the depth of technology, will decide which partner benefits more in the long run. What changes for enterprise buyers? Risk, resilience, and cloud sovereignty. For Indian enterprises, the Airtel and IBM partnership lands at a point where the cloud story is no longer about curiosity, it is about control. Most CIOs have already moved what they can to global platforms. What remains are the workloads that cannot travel, the ones weighed down by compliance, audit trails, or simply the fear of losing data sovereignty. This partnership promises to house those systems safely inside the country, using IBM's technology and Airtel's local backbone. It is an appealing pitch, but it changes more than infrastructure. It alters who enterprises trust, how they price risk, and what local really means. CIOs, cautious hope, conditional trust. For a CIO, the upside is easy to see. IBM's Power 11 machines and hybrid cloud stack can lift legacy workloads that were too heavy or too sensitive for public cloud. Airtel's data center network checks the localization box and gives the comfort of Indian jurisdiction. On paper, it feels like a clean compromise between agility and control. But most CIOs have long memories. They remember the private cloud pilots that overpromised and the hyperscaler deals that started cheap but ended tangled in billing and lock-in. The Airtel and IBM model will need to prove it is not another halfway house. Two vendors mean two accountability chains and two escalation paths when things break. Unless Airtel and IBM present one face to the customer, CIOs could find themselves refereeing between partners when they would rather be restoring uptime. CISOs, governance meets ground reality. For security leaders, the word sovereign sounds comforting on slides, but the operational reality is more complex. Airtel may own the data centers, but IBM will still push software updates, license keys, and remote diagnostics. Those are external touchpoints that could open gaps if not controlled. The real question is not where the data sits. It is who touches it, under what conditions, and how that access is audited. CISOs will have to dig deeper into encryption key management, remote access logs, and breach notification policies. The compliance optics will help with regulators, servers in India, operations under an Indian entity. Yet if visibility and control do not match that promise, sovereignty becomes cosmetic. The buyers who insist on unified dashboards and single-window incident reporting will get value. The rest will settle for a comfort blanket that may not hold up under scrutiny. CFOs, predictability with a footnote. Finance teams will welcome Airtel's promise of simpler, more predictable pricing. Hyperscalers have turned cloud invoices into moving targets, and billing in rupees alone will make life easier. However, adding IBM to the mix complicates things. Airtel will charge for compute and storage, while IBM will bill for software, AI layers, and sometimes consulting. The total spend may look more transparent, but that does not mean it will be cheaper. CFOs will need to separate Airtel's consumption charges from IBM's software margins and watch for overlap disguised as integration. There is one clear upside: fewer surprises from currency swings and data egress fees. That relief matters, provided procurement teams lock in clear rate cards and renewal terms early. Without those clauses, predictability will evaporate at the first contract revision. CTOs, the architecture trade-off. For CTOs, the appeal lies in structure. IBM's hybrid cloud stack and Red Hat OpenShift give them a bridge between on-prem systems and public cloud environments. Airtel's regional zones add resilience inside national borders. For sectors like banking and telecom, that setup makes practical sense. Even so, it is not a silver bullet. The combined platform handles stable workloads and AI inference, but not the heavy AI training or wide replication that hyperscalers excel at. Companies expecting infinite scalability may hit ceilings sooner than they think. The Airtel and IBM model works best as an anchor for sensitive or regulated workloads, not as a substitute for the global clouds already in play. It brings order, not absolution. Early movers, who will try first? The first adopters will come from sectors that already live under strict compliance rules: banking, financial services, healthcare, and government IT. Most will start small, shifting backups and analytics sandboxes before moving core systems. That is how Indian enterprises usually approach new models: pilot first, scale later. What will decide the pace is evidence: measurable uptime, predictable cost, and regulatory comfort. If those appear early, adoption will accelerate. If not, the market will watch in silence until someone else takes the risk. Recent Greyhound Pulse data reflects this caution. Roughly 60% of Indian CIOs describe their next cloud phase as hybrid with local control, but fewer than 1 in 5 have committed to a domestic platform. Airtel and IBM must convince that middle group that sovereign does not mean slow or second best. Greyhound standpoint. At Greyhound Research, we view the Airtel and IBM partnership as a thoughtful experiment for buyers rather than an instant solution. CIOs get a potential bridge between reliability and reform. CISOs gain local oversight, but must still verify the operational fine print. CFOs may finally see cost visibility, though not guaranteed savings. The partnership offers a real chance to balance compliance and innovation. But as history keeps showing, freedom without structure can easily rebuild the same complexity enterprises thought they were leaving behind. What this partnership signals to the ecosystem: a new definition of neutral. The Airtel and IBM partnership has done something few corporate announcements manage. It has changed the conversation before it has even produced a customer win. In one stroke, it has forced every serious player in India's cloud and AI infrastructure market to ask a harder question. If sovereignty is now a service, who gets to define it? This isn't just about cloud capacity or data center footprints. It's about trust as infrastructure, and that realization is already rippling through vendors, integrators, regulators, and the policy establishment. Hyperscalers, adjusting to a market that finally pushes back. For years, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud treated India as a growth region where global templates would simply localize. They built regions in Mumbai, Hyderabad, and Delhi NCR, staff compliance teams, and assumed that would be enough. It was until now, Airtel and IBM changed the framing. It is a cloud built inside India's legal perimeter, under Indian ownership, using global-grade technology. That is the detail hyperscalers wish they could copy, but cannot without overhauling their own structures. Expect them to respond on 3 fronts. 1/optics, more India-specific messaging about compliance and audit readiness, more partnerships with state governments and public sector bodies. 2/architecture, deeper localization of support, perhaps even ring-fenced India trust zones with limited cross-border metadata movement. 3/pricing, short-term incentives to lock customers before sovereign options mature. They will still dominate raw compute and AI training workloads, but they have lost the uncontested moral high ground on governance. In a country where regulation and perception now travel together, that is not a trivial loss. Domestic cloud providers. Local no longer means enough. For years, Indian cloud and hosting companies have sold the line that local equals safe. That argument just expired. Airtel, by partnering with IBM, has merged local credibility with global engineering. It has raised the bar for what Indian cloud must mean: sovereign and sophisticated. That puts pressure on mid-tier providers such as Tata Communications, Control-S, HCL, and a dozen regional players. They will need to invest in automation, compliance frameworks, and enterprise-grade support if they want to stay in the conversation. The easy era of selling geography as a substitute for capability is over. Several will try to align quickly. Expect new joint ventures with foreign hardware vendors or niche hyperscalers to mirror the Airtel and IBM template. Others may retreat into specialized verticals, defense, state-owned enterprises, and healthcare, where smaller footprints can still win on proximity. Either way, the market has been recalibrated. Telcos, watching a peer turn competitor. Airtel's move also shakes its domestic peers. Reliance Jio, Vodafone Idea, and BSNL are watching closely. Jio's partnership with Microsoft Azure looked unassailable 3 years ago. Today, it feels predictable. Airtel has offered an alternative model, not renting capacity from a hyperscaler, but co-building a platform with a global vendor on its own terms. That distinction matters. It gives Airtel the narrative of control and transparency, qualities hyperscaler-branded clouds struggle to project in regulated sectors. Vodafone Idea, still nursing its balance sheet troubles, lacks the capital to follow suit. BSNL's government backing gives it a sovereign argument, but not the agility. For the moment, Airtel owns the high ground in trusted telco cloud. System integrators and IT services giants. Opportunity wrapped in tension. For the big integrators, TCS, Infosys, Wipro, Tech Mahindra, and the global consultancies, the partnership cuts 2 ways. On one hand, it gives them a new platform to build solutions on, especially for BFSI and government clients that demand domestic hosting. On the other, Airtel is now a direct competitor in managed services. When a telco starts selling governance, not just connectivity, the integrator's middle layer looks thinner. Most of these firms will adapt by repositioning. Expect them to become brokers of compliance, designing architectures that blend hyperscaler compute with sovereign cloud control. A few may even partner with Airtel to create industry-specific offerings. But the adjustment will not be painless. Hyperscaler incentive programs, the rebates, training funds, and co-marketing budgets that have quietly padded system integrator margins will likely shrink as sovereign projects divert spending. Policy and regulation, a rare alignment of commerce and compliance. For New Delhi's policymakers, the Airtel and IBM model is a vindication years in the making. India's push for data localization, digital public infrastructure, and sovereign cloud frameworks has often been criticized as protectionist. Now, a global firm has effectively endorsed it by working inside the regulatory perimeter rather than lobbying around it. That gives regulators license to go further. We can expect new guidelines that codify India-only hosting for certain categories of data and possibly incentives for foreign firms that localize architecture through Indian partnerships. Airtel and IBM have become the talking points bureaucrats will cite when they argue that compliance and innovation can coexist. This also sets the tone for trade negotiations. The government can now tell foreign partners that localization is not a barrier. It is a proven business model. For IBM, this alignment offers long-term insulation from political risk, something it has not always enjoyed in other emerging markets. The industry mood, neutral, is outdated. For decades, the safest word in enterprise technology was neutral. Vendors promised to be platform-agnostic, regulator-friendly, and globally consistent. That stance once made sense. In 2025, it looks evasive. Indian enterprises no longer equate neutrality with safety. They equate visibility, jurisdiction, and verifiability with safety. Airtel and IBM embody that shift. They do not pretend to be agnostic. They promise to be accountable. That is a subtle but fundamental redefinition. Every ecosystem player will now have to pick a lane. Hyperscalers can stay global, but must prove compliance. Local providers can stay domestic, but must prove capability. Integrators can stay in the middle, but must show independence. Even regulators will have to clarify what trusted means in a world where sovereignty and commercial interest are now fused. The broader implication, from scale to accountability. The global cloud story has long been told in terabytes and regions. Airtel and IBM flipped the narrative. The new metric is not how much infrastructure a vendor controls, but how much trust it can operationalize. That is a harder race to win, but also a more sustainable one. For India, this marks a coming of age. The country is no longer just a consumer of global cloud services. It is a test market for a new governance-first model. If Airtel and IBM deliver, it will not just change competitive dynamics here. It could export the blueprint to other regulated economies looking for the same balance. Greyhound standpoint. At Greyhound Research, we see the Airtel and IBM partnership as the moment the Indian cloud market drew a line between convenience and accountability. It challenges hyperscalers to localize with integrity, pushes domestic players to professionalize, and gives regulators the evidence they have wanted for a decade. The definition of neutral has shifted. It now lives inside borders. And from here on, the measure of leadership will not be scale, it will be stewardship. How integration has played out before, lessons from past tech alliances. Every big technology partnership begins with conviction, and most of them, a few years later, end in quiet retreat. The promises rarely fail on paper. They fail in the day-to-day grind where cultures, costs, and calendars do not align. The Airtel and IBM story is not the first of its kind. It sits on top of a long line of similar attempts, each with its own ambitions, bruises, and lessons. The first Airtel and IBM chapter, Ambition Meets Fatigue, go back to 2004. Airtel handed IBM one of the largest IT outsourcing deals India had ever seen. IBM ran almost everything: servers, storage, and applications. It looked visionary. Airtel focused on customers while IBM took care of technology. 10 years later, the spell broke. Costs grew, flexibility shrank, and Airtel realized it had outsourced too much control. By 2014, the contract was trimmed, and multiple vendors came in to share the work. What began as mutual dependence ended as managed distance. That memory shapes how both sides think now. Airtel remembers the loss of agility. IBM remembers the pain of shrinking revenue. The new cloud partnership is an uneasy reunion. Two old partners are reuniting because the market has left neither with a better option. Vodafone and IBM, the European mirror. In 2019, IBM tried something similar in Europe with Vodafone Business. They formed a joint venture worth around $500 million. The goal was hybrid cloud, AI services, and shared delivery. It sounded perfect, IBM's engineering with Vodafone's reach. 2 years in, attention drifted. Vodafone went back to fixing its core network. IBM chased other clients. Without constant leadership focus, the joint venture slowed down and eventually folded back into Vodafone's enterprise division. That pattern matters here. Airtel and IBM do not even have a joint venture structure this time. It is leaner and more flexible, but it also lacks a shared scoreboard. No joint board, no single P&L. If coordination turns ad hoc, both sides could quietly retreat without anyone calling it failure. AT&T and IBM. Familiar story, different continent. In 2019, IBM signed another large partnership, this time with AT&T Business. IBM would modernize AT&T's internal apps. while AT&T would host workloads on IBM Cloud. Soon after, AT&T cut a bigger, louder deal with Microsoft Azure for its 5G and edge systems. IBM was left managing back-office software, useful but invisible. The deal survived in pieces, not spirit. The lesson is simple: telcos hedge. They keep multiple global vendors on call, and loyalty usually belongs to whoever drives short-term growth. Airtel is no different. It already maintains partnerships with AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. If IBM does not prove fast value, measurable uptime, faster migrations, cleaner pricing, Airtel will divert focus where the returns look easier. Microsoft and Geo, the domestic comparison. When Reliance Jio tied up with Microsoft Azure in 2019, the pitch was even grander. Azure would sit inside Jio's data centers, and Microsoft apps would serve millions of Indian businesses through Jio's reach. A decade-long alliance, they said. The plan started well. Then friction appeared: pricing complexity, integration slowdowns, and conflicting commercial priorities. Jio kept Azure for enterprise clients but built its own stack for small businesses. The two remain partners, but the relationship looks more transactional than transformative. That is the quiet reality of this sector. Partnerships do not collapse dramatically. They just stop mattering as much. Airtel and IBM will need to guard against that fade. Patterns that keep reappearing. If you line up these alliances, the story repeats itself with eerie consistency. The first year is harmony. The marketing slides align, the leadership quotes sound coordinated, and the first few clients are usually in the pipeline before the ink dries. The second year is friction. Cultural gaps surface, the telco counting minutes, the tech giant counting billable hours. Margins start looking different on each balance sheet. The third year is fatigue. The executive sponsors change, the quarterly reviews turn into biannual catch-ups, and someone quietly declares strategic realignment. These partnerships rarely end, they just fade. Why Airtel and IBM might hold a little longer? There are reasons this one might last longer. First, the timing. India's regulators are writing laws that fit what Airtel and IBM are building. The partnership sits neatly inside a national agenda: data sovereignty, digital infrastructure, and AI governance. That gives it political wind, and political wind often buys time. Second, both companies are different from their 2014 selves. Airtel has rebuilt its IT muscle. It runs most of its own workloads on its own platform. IBM has shed its old baggage, refocused on hybrid cloud, and learned to be a partner instead of a contractor. The combination still will not be easy. Airtel's instinct will be to move fast. IBM's instinct will be to measure twice before cutting once. But they are entering this with eyes open and a shared need. Airtel gets global credibility. IBM gets local relevance. The question is whether they can keep that balance once the spotlight moves elsewhere. Partnerships survive when they evolve from presentation slides to shared habits, daily joint teams, clear escalation rules, and real revenue accountability. That is the hard part, and it is the one every past example warns about. Greyhound standpoint. At Greyhound Research, we have seen enough of these stories to know that ambition is not the issue, endurance is. Airtel and IBM have both been here before. They know what went wrong last time. That knowledge could make them disciplined or cautious to a fault. Either way, this partnership will prove its worth not in the next quarter, but in the next 3 years, when the headlines fade and the hard work of staying aligned begins. Patterns of promise and risk. 5 realities that keep coming back. Every technology partnership follows a rhythm. It begins with belief, swells into momentum, and somewhere between the first press release and the third board review, starts to feel ordinary. The Airtel and IBM alliance is no different. It carries genuine promise, but it also inherits familiar patterns that have repeated across every telco tech collaboration of the last decade. Below are 5 realities that tend to resurface no matter how carefully a deal is structured. They are not predictions. They are habits the industry has not quite broken yet. 1/integration always looks cleaner in the slide deck than in production. On day 1, Airtel and IBM are speaking the same language: hybrid cloud, AI orchestration, and sovereign infrastructure. The problem comes when those slogans meet real systems. Airtel's network stack was not built for the kind of tight coupling IBM's software expects. IBM's tools assume layers of governance that telco teams find excessive. The first customers will see this gap. Integrating legacy power workloads into Airtel Cloud will take more time and custom engineering than a launch visual suggests. And because both firms need to show early wins, there's a risk of overpromising on timelines. Integration may work, but but will be slower and more expensive than either side is ready to admit in public. 2/cost discipline will test loyalty faster than technology does. Telcos measure margins in single digits. IBM lives on premium service and software pricing. That difference will surface early. Airtel will push for low-cost scalability, and IBM will want to protect its consulting rates and license value. Each quarter will bring tension over who absorbs discounts and who owns the customer relationship. In similar partnerships elsewhere, including AT&T with IBM, Vodafone with IBM, and Geo with Microsoft, the argument always returned to pricing. As enterprise buyers tighten budgets, the partner who blinks first on cost often wins the account, but loses enthusiasm for the partnership. Airtel and IBM must find a shared pricing logic before the first RFP, not after. 3/sales alignment fades as soon as incentives diverge. At launch, both sales teams will sit side by side, chasing the same clients. But IBM's global compensation model rewards software attach and consulting pull-through, not cloud infrastructure growth. Airtel's enterprise teams sell volume and recurring bandwidth. Those instincts rarely align for long. Unless both companies build shared sales metrics, joint account ownership, shared revenue credit, and pooled bonuses, the sell with ambition will start to splinter. Airtel's teams will revert to pushing hyperscaler deals that close faster, while IBM's teams will prioritize direct clients where they control margin. What begins as collaboration could quietly slip into coexistence. Operational friction will test cultural patience. The two organizations do not run on the same rhythm. Airtel's culture prizes immediacy. Its decision chains are short, often led from the top. IBM is meticulous, hierarchical, and slow to sign off. That mismatch can make even simple approvals crawl. Joint delivery projects will feel the strain first. Engineers will need joint playbooks, escalation routines, and a clear way to resolve ownership during incidents. Without that, the partnership could fall into the same trap that hurt Vodafone and IBM. Parallel teams solving the same problem twice, with no one accountable for the delay. 5/customer perception will move faster than delivery. In the enterprise market, stories travel quicker than updates. If the first wave of Airtel and IBM deployments runs smoothly, buyers will notice. If they stumble, whether through slow onboarding, unclear pricing, or mixed support, the impression of fragility will harden fast. Enterprise CIOs, especially in banking and government, are already wary of joint solutions where responsibility is split. One major incident, and the question will come: who answers the regulator, Airtel or IBM? If both point to each other, confidence will evaporate. The best defense will be visible ownership, single support desks, transparent SLAs, and executives who are reachable when things go wrong. That is what converts interest into trust. Greyhound standpoint. At Greyhound Research, we have seen this movie before. The same 5 problems show up in almost every major alliance. Integration that drags, pricing that pinches, incentives that drift, cultures that clash, and customers who lose patience. None of it is new. What matters is how early the partners catch it and how quietly they fix it. Airtel and IBM do not need to be perfect. They need to stay alert. Success here will not come from another press conference. It will come from the unglamorous, everyday work of keeping promises when no one is watching. The Enterprise Defense Playbook: 5 ways to stay in control. For enterprise buyers, the real work begins after the partnership headlines fade. Airtel and IBM are building an architecture that promises sovereignty, transparency, and compliance. But those words only mean something if buyers write the right terms into their own contracts and operations. This is not about distrust. It is about realism. The smarter CIOs and CISOs will move early to lock in protections before the new platform becomes indispensable. 1/draw your boundaries before the platform does. Once workloads move onto a new stack, the vendor's roadmap starts defining your own. Before signing up for Airtel and IBM services, map out which applications must stay portable and which can live inside the joint cloud. Document every interface, data flow, and dependency. That is the only way to know what can be unplugged later if pricing or performance changes. Sovereignty is not just about geography. It is about exit rights. 2/separate the promises from the penalties. Both Airtel and IBM will talk about uptime, support, and compliance. Insist that those guarantees carry measurable penalties. If Airtel controls the physical infrastructure and IBM controls the software layer, make sure both are accountable for outages and response times. 2 vendors mean 2 points of failure. You need one SLA that binds them together, not a stack of disclaimers. 3/keep pricing visible and variable. Early pricing will look attractive. Later, bundled renewals will appear, mixing IBM software, Airtel hosting, and value-added services. To avoid surprises, tie each price component to an independent index, such as power cost, currency rate, or compute utilization. Fix renewal formulas in writing. Otherwise, the predictability that made you choose a domestic provider can vanish after year 2. Build your own audit trail, and don't just rely on theirs. Sovereign clouds often promise better compliance, but real control comes from data you collect yourself. Make sure your audit logs cover every layer: Airtel's network operations, IBM's middleware, and your own applications. Ask for read-only access to monitoring tools and for export rights on all logs. In regulated sectors, the regulator will hold you, not your vendors, responsible for lapses. 5/design the exit while you are still happy. The best time to plan a migration path is when no one is talking about leaving. Whether you're moving data back on-prem or into another cloud, get clear timelines and cost caps for extraction. The partnership's value will depend on how gracefully you can leave it. A cloud that cannot let go of you is not sovereign, it is captive. Greyhound standpoint. At Greyhound Research, we have learned that buyer control is not a legal clause. It is a discipline. Airtel and IBM are offering a serious alternative for enterprises that want to keep their data inside India. But control shifts quickly when enthusiasm replaces due diligence. The winners will be those who treat contracts, audits, and exit plans as living instruments, not paperwork. Sovereignty starts the day you join, not the day you try to leave. The Enterprise CXO Playbook. 5 questions that shape readiness. By now, the Airtel and IBM partnership has moved from announcement to architecture. The sales pitch is steady, the service catalog is expanding, and the first enterprise trials are quietly underway. For leadership teams watching from the sidelines, the question is not whether this alliance will work. It is what it means for how they plan, buy, and govern technology from here on. The smartest boards will not rush to adopt. They will pause to ask sharper questions about what this model implies for their own strategy. These are not action points. They are reflection points, the kind of questions that shape how enterprises stay prepared when the market around them starts to reset. 1/ when the cloud becomes sovereign, who owns accountability? Regulation is tightening, and data now lives in jurisdictions as much as it lives in servers. Airtel and IBM are offering control through localization, but ownership of that control still sits with the buyer. The CIO and the General Counsel must agree on what sovereign actually covers: data, metadata, logs, or the entire workload. The regulator will not chase the vendor when something goes wrong. They will call the enterprise first. 2/ can price predictability survive long enough to matter? Every cloud partnership starts with attractive pricing, then inches toward complexity. Airtel's billing may be in rupees, but IBM's licenses and consulting add-ons will not stay insulated from global currency cycles. CFOs should assume the true cost will rise in line with consumption and inflation, even in a sovereign setup. The comfort of local billing is real, but temporary. 3/ how do we keep multi-cloud from turning into multi-chaos? The average large enterprise already runs workloads across AWS, Azure, and private stacks. Adding Airtel and IBM to the mix might fix compliance, but it also adds another governance layer. CTOs need a plan for orchestration, not just technology, but policy. What counts as a system of record when a bank's data pipeline spans 5 vendors? Without a unifying control plane, multi-cloud quickly becomes a polite word for untraceable. For / what happens when the partner's priorities shift? Airtel's focus today is on enterprise growth. IBM's focus is on hybrid AI adoption. Those are aligned for now, but markets change. If Airtel doubles down on 5G or consumer platforms, or if IBM reprioritizes its AI stack toward direct clients, who safeguards enterprise continuity, CIOs should treat alliances like this not as permanent fixtures, but as commercial relationships with half-lives. Plan for independence early. 5/ are we gaining control, or just changing who we depend on? Sovereign does not always mean independent. A cloud that keeps data inside the country can still trap a business inside its stack, locked to proprietary hardware, unique APIs, or scarce certified talent. Before migrating core workloads, enterprises should run an exit drill. How hard would it be to leave if regulation tightens or pricing shifts? If the answer takes more than one meeting to explain, the control is probably an illusion. Greyhound standpoint. At Greyhound Research, we have learned that the right questions often outlast the right answers. The Airtel and IBM partnership invites optimism, but it demands scrutiny. For enterprise leaders, this is not about rushing to adopt a new platform. It is about rethinking what control actually looks like when technology and regulation start sharing the same stage. Reflection, not reaction, is the smarter play. The strategic reset, what this partnership teaches about platform power. Every major shift in technology begins quietly. The Airtel and IBM partnership did not come with the noise of a merger or the urgency of regulation, but may turn out to be just as consequential. It marks the point where India's cloud market stopped mimicking global trends and began writing its own rules. This is not a deal about hardware or hosting. It is about trust, who builds it, who governs it, and who can monetize it responsibly. Airtel and IBM have turned trust itself into infrastructure. Airtel brings jurisdiction, geography, and political credibility. IBM brings reliability, engineering, and global standardization. Together, they're trying to make compliance by design a commercial feature, not a legal burden. If it works, this partnership will redefine what cloud neutrality means in regulated economies. The conversation will shift from performance and uptime to accountability and transparency. Hyperscalers will be pushed to prove their alignment with local laws instead of merely adjusting to them. Domestic providers will have to upgrade to global standards rather than leaning on geography as an excuse. For enterprises, the partnership brings a mix of reassurance and restraint. There is comfort in finally having a domestic cloud option that meets global standards without giving up control over data. Yet there is also hesitation, because the same promise of control depends on both partners staying aligned over time. The Airtel-IBM arrangement feels well-timed, but delicate. If it holds, India could turn this sovereign hybrid model into an exportable blueprint. If it slips, it will remind everyone that governance can't simply be handed over, even to partners you trust. Greyhound standpoint. At Greyhound Research, we believe the Airtel and IBM collaboration is a quiet turning point. It shifts the cloud conversation from capacity to credibility, from access to accountability. It does not just promise a new cloud. It tests a new covenant between policy, technology, and enterprise trust. Whether it becomes a template or a footnote will depend on how well both partners remember that sovereignty is not a slogan. It is a responsibility. Analyst in focus. Sanchit Gogia. Sanchit Gogia, or SVG as he is popularly known, is a globally recognized technology analyst, innovation strategist, digital consultant, and board advisor. SVG is the chief analyst, founder and CEO of Greyhound Research, a global, award-winning technology research, advisory, consulting, and education firm. Greyhound Research works closely with global organizations, their CXOs, and the board of directors on technology and digital transformation decisions. SVG is also the founder and CEO of the House of Greyhound, an eclectic venture focusing on interdisciplinary innovation. Copyright policy. All content contained on the Greyhound Research website is protected by copyright law and may not be reproduced, distributed, transmitted, displayed, published, or broadcast without the prior written permission of Greyhound Research or, in the case of third-party materials, the prior written consent of the copyright owner of that content. You may not alter, delete, obscure, or conceal any trademark, copyright, or other notice appearing in any Greyhound Research content. We request our readers not to copy Greyhound Research content and not republish or redistribute them, in whole or partially, via emails or republishing them in any media, including websites, newsletters, or intranets. We understand that you may want to share this content with others, so we've added tools under each content piece that allow you to share the content. If you have any questions, please get in touch with our community relations team at connect@thoffer.com.